Today, countering China, what we can learn from World War II. Hello again, it's Martin North from Digital Finance Analytics, World Latest Post covering finance and property news with a distinctly Australian flavour and with a bit of philosophy on the side. Today I'm joined again by Salvatore Babones. Hi there, Salvatore.
Hi Martin, how are you?
I'm very good. Thanks very much for spending a bit more time with us. And you've been busy again, haven't you?
Well, I have an article that's currently leading at the National Interest in the United States. It's one of the major political magazines in the United States, and it's about what we should learn from our past experience facing totalitarianism when it comes to the rise of China.
Right, and this I think is a very important conversation, particularly with the recent behaviour that we've seen from China. And, there are some parallels, and I guess there are some differences too.
Well, I've come to think that there are a lot more parallels than differences. And I'm not someone who would have said this, 4 years ago or maybe even 2 years ago. But the parallels are accumulating. When you start to compare what China is doing in 2020 to where Germany was in 1938, there are a lot of scary parallels. And let me just go through some of the scariest. To begin with, the word totalitarian. I mean, a lot of people like to call China authoritarian, as if authoritarianism were some kind of lighter version of totalitarianism or not quite as bad. They're very different political forms. And when I call China totalitarian, I mean that in the full sense. I mean, if you consider, let's just leave aside the fact that we all like to visit China. I've visited China many times as a tourist, not just as an academic. I really enjoy it. But let's get down to facts. First, China does have party officials, Communist Party officials, in all major institutions. Every corporation, every labor union, every school, every university. The oppression of religion is epic. Non-sanctioned religious groups are severely oppressed, whether that's Protestant house churches or the Catholic Church, in which the Chinese government insists on appointing the bishops within China. There's, of course, a big debate between China and the Catholic Church on that. Tibetan Buddhists who are severely oppressed within China. Islam, especially in Western China. There's a difference here between the quasi-official accepted Islam of the Hui minority in China versus the Uyghur minority in Western China, which is severely repressed, concentration camps, and of course Falun Gong, which we could debate whether or not it's a religion, but it certainly falls into that sphere of religious style oppression in China. Falun Gong isn't just prohibited in China, it is severely repressed in China. Add to that government monitoring and here I'm going to say literally, and I'm going to say that word advisedly, literally all electronic communication. It's not just that everything you say online can be read by the government. Everything you say online is read by the government, and even private messages. Messaging services like WeChat actively self-censor so that if you use a prohibited word on WeChat, the message won't go through. And I'm talking in private communications. I'm not talking about people trying to reach a public audience. I'm saying if you write to your best friend or your romantic partner or a family member a message that is not acceptable to the Chinese censors, that message simply won't go through. And encryption is illegal. So you can't just encrypt your message and have a private conversation. All of us who use WhatsApp and other encrypted message services just take it for granted that, of course, you would encrypt your private communications. Well, a lot of people in China manage to do it, but it is illegal. Now, that's a lot of baggage just for a ground level. That's what we start from when we start talking about the problems in China. That's not the end of it.
Right. And of course, the point is that this is all about an ideological position, isn't it? And it's asserting a particular thought framework and power structure that effectively pushes everything and everybody in a particular direction.
Well, that's maybe what they can do with their totalitarian control, and maybe that's what people focus on. If you are used to George Orwell and reading Animal Farm, or even if you think of the totalitarianism of the old Soviet Union. But I've been really focusing much more on the Hitler and the Nazis comparison for China, because it's not just totalitarianism. It's structurally so deep that interpenetration of the party and its will with all institutions of society. But the parallels with Germany, even more so than with other totalitarian regimes, are really scary. So we have, of course, the Uyghur concentration camps in Western China. We can debate, genocide is a loaded term, and China does not seem to have committed any kind of mass murders in Western China or in Tibet. But we're maybe in 1938 territory, where, in 1938 there wasn't a Holocaust yet, but there were concentration camps, and just as Jews and gypsies and intellectuals, a strange combination, homosexuals, were being herded into concentration camps. In the same way, we see Uyghurs, Tibetans, intellectuals being herded into prison or concentration camps, labor camps. Of course, homosexuality is illegal in China, so that's another parallel with Nazi Germany. The imprisonment of lawyers and anyone who might speak up for someone, again, is another parallel. These are very scary, regardless of the ideological content you put into it. Now, I know you're kind of alluding to the party ideology and China's approach to the world, and we can get into that and why that itself is scary. But even without that, even when we just talk about the structural forms that have been put in place inside China, I think we have to stop kind of using the kid glove treatment, which I myself have used for years, saying that, well, there are problems in China, but I believe in engagement. There are problems in China, but I love pandas. I love to visit. I visited, many of the first-tier cities of China and really enjoyed it. But now I'm starting to feel like, maybe we all need to start speaking up a little bit.
And I guess that also means that the extensions of China, I'm thinking of its companies and the way it reaches out, and the fact that we engage with them and everybody else does, right? Yeah. Behind the scenes, there are power structures that may not be obvious, which means that effectively some of the communications and some of the decisions that are actually taken, and the reason things are being done in a particular way, may be right the way back through, rather than something which is purely commercial.
These are not commercial organizations. I don't think any organization in China is a purely commercial organization, nor are they necessarily purely state organizations. There's some kind of hybrid. But it goes so much deeper than that, Martin. We've talked before about the threat posed to Australia by Chinese-controlled companies, and will the Chinese government exert influence on Australia? These kind of questions. I'm getting at a much deeper moral unease about China. Take something that we all kind of, laugh off is the wrong word, but kind of dismiss, the Chinese notions of Han supremacy. Now, of course, here in Australia, if you were a white supremacist, we would shun you like the devil. None of us, even those of us who are perceived as being white, brook any ideas of white supremacy. That's just not done. In China, Han supremacy is just taken for granted, and it's used to stifle minorities, to try to eliminate minority identities. But even worse, China routinely, and by here I mean the government of the People's Republic of China, routinely claims to speak for all people of Han Chinese ancestry everywhere in the world, whether that's in Taiwan. Okay, we could say Taiwan is a problematic case for historical reasons, but even in Southeast Asia, where we see the Chinese government trying to speak up for Chinese minority populations, many of whom their families left China anywhere between 150 and 350 years ago. And even in the English-speaking countries, where if there is an anti-Chinese racism incident in a country like Australia or the United States, China takes umbrage, despite the fact that the incident of racism may be directed at local Chinese who have no citizenship or recent connection to the People's Republic of China at all. Well, that sounds to me a lot like Germany in the 1930s leading up to 1938 of saying that Germans everywhere. Remember, before World War II, there were German minority populations spread all throughout Eastern Europe. I mean, you could go as far east as Ukraine and find German communities, or at least German-speaking communities in those regions. Now, after World War II, they were all forced to emigrate back to Germany. For many of them, their family roots hadn't been in Germany for hundreds of years. They had been these, small, in some cases large German communities throughout Eastern Europe. Hitler and the Nazi Party attempted to speak for them, to say, well, they're Germans, we're going to stand up for their rights. And stand up for their rights eventually meant invade entire countries in order to assert Germany's authority to speak for all people of German descent. I mean, they even tried to get German Americans involved in that. They had very few takers among German Americans. But again, it's just a scary precedent for something that China considers routine.
So, thinking about this then, and you're talking about 1938, should we be worrying about the clock going further into, 39, 40, 41 and what, because that's a really scary thought. I mean, is that a real risk, do you think?
Well, look, I don't know. And as people like to quote the aphorism, history doesn't repeat, but it does rhyme. Who knows who actually said it, whether it was Mark Twain or not, but it very much is true. No, I don't expect China to start a campaign of ethnic eradication and some kind of 21st century final solution and invade India and attempt to conquer all of Asia. I don't expect that. But then who knew what the Germans were going to do in 1938? I mean, most Westerners in 1938 saw the regime in Germany as a problem, as a challenge. I mean, we debate appeasement and was Churchill right or was Chamberlain right? Well, Neville Chamberlain did not like that regime in Germany. But he thought that it could be negotiated with, it could be dealt with, that, okay, we can give in to some of their demands, but not others, it can be contained. Now, I don't know what China is going to do with its expanding power and expanding totalitarianism. I think we don't want to find out. And that's my message to people, is that it's really time to start thinking about preventing whatever's going to come. I mean, it may not be a genocide we're preventing. It may not be a world war we're preventing. It may be something we haven't imagined that we're preventing. But whatever it is, we're getting very close to the time when we should be taking action. I mean, again, taking the 1938 parallel, 1938 was a time of irredentism, meaning that Germany was attempting to redraw borders in its favor. And we saw that in Germany in the remilitarization of the Rhineland, and the pole that led to the Rhineland becoming reunited permanently with Germany. Their attempts to gain influence over Danzig, which I think, so if you think of the Rhineland and trying to take territory, to me that's very similar to what they're doing on the Indian frontier. China is claiming this is and always has been Chinese territory. All we're doing is taking control of territory that's been Chinese since time immemorial. If you think of Germany and Danzig, well, Hong Kong comes to mind. Of Danzig, the former free city, now Gdansk in present-day Poland, the former free city under UN auspices. Well, Hong Kong has been a kind of free city under its own basic law that China has just obliterated, and now it's effectively just part of China. Germany in 1938 was demanding Anschluss with Austria, that Austria should become part of Germany because they were German-speaking people. And of course, we have China's repeated statements that it reserves the right to invade Taiwan and military exercises simulating the invasion of Taiwan. Now, I've been arguing for the last 10 years that China does not have the capacity to invade Taiwan, and that it's not going to invade Taiwan. And frankly, if you ask for my opinion, I don't think China is going to invade Taiwan. But China says it's going to invade Taiwan, and wouldn't we all look very foolish if we didn't take their threats seriously when they've been saying all along that they reserve the right to invade Taiwan, and they're staging exercises of an invasion of Taiwan. publicly to put that behind their threat. And then, of course, you have things like the Sudetenland of China Germany in 1938 trying to expand into neighboring countries. Well, the South China Sea dispute is China expanding into neighboring countries. I mean, areas that were settled that no one had disputed for decades as being the sea territories of the literal countries of the South China Sea, Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, are all of a sudden disputed, and very aggressively disputed. So, where will China go with all this? What's going to happen? I don't know. Am I concerned? Well, I would say for the first time in my professional life, I've actually flipped over from, look, it's all a bunch of bluster on the Chinese side and things will get better, to, well, we really should take seriously what they themselves say they're going to do.
And what does that mean then, both in terms of politics and the political relationship with China, and also the economics and business relationships with China? Because presumably both those spheres should then be looked at rather differently.
Well, my own analysis is that it's mainly neutrals that need to stand up. I mean, so far, let's face it, the United States, in the form of the Trump administration, has been very aggressive about containing China. In its first military posture paper, it identified China as a strategic rival, and has been very aggressive about running freedom of navigation patrols in the South China Sea, visiting Taiwan, selling arms throughout the region, establishing a presence for the United States to pivot to Asia, which was announced under the Obama administration, really became a reality under the Trump administration. It's the neutrals, I think, who really need to step up. And here again, I'll use a World War II analogy. In the early days of World War II, Norway fell to Germany, to a shock German invasion. Well, it fell because it was a neutral country. It was obviously friendly to the Allies. And in fact, Norwegians fought courageously. The whole Norwegian Merchant Marine joined the Allied cause. So Norway, I think, has nothing to be ashamed of for its conduct in World War II. But had Norway in 1938 explicitly allied itself with the Western Allies, they would have had British troops already in Norway. They would have had the Royal Navy operating out of Norwegian ports, and Norway would never have fallen to Germany. Similarly, Sweden collaborated with Germany throughout the war, and I'm sorry, Swedish friends, for saying that, but Germany's steel came from Swedish iron throughout the war. Now, there is an argument that if Sweden had resisted, it simply would have been overrun. That argument does make a lot of sense, until you consider if Sweden had joined Norway and joining the Allies in 1938, Germany would have been much more reluctant to start the war with a united Scandinavia against it. Similarly with Belgium and the Netherlands, both neutral countries. Well, the breakthrough in France and the collapse of the French front, would that have happened if the Dutch fought courageously against German paratroopers? Well, if the Dutch had already been reinforced with British troops, if the British Expeditionary Force, instead of sitting back near the Channel waiting to go into Belgium and the Netherlands, if it already were in position in Belgium and the Netherlands, if the Dutch ports were already secured, there may have been no Dunkirk, there may have been no fall of France. So I really think we need to think about the World War II example as one that teaches us that to prevent World War II, not to win it once it broke out, to prevent it, or at least prevent it coming west. There's very little the West could have done for Poland, I think. But to prevent it and to stop it right there, neutrals should have stepped up and joined the Western alliance instead of trying to sit on the fence. And I think today, I'm sorry to go on and on with this answer, but when we look around the South China Sea, we see countries like the Philippines sitting on the fence saying, well, if things get really bad, we'll call in the United States. We'll call in the cavalry. And until last year, I would have said the same for Australia, that we even had Australia sitting on the fence saying, well, we want to keep both, we want to have a productive relationship with both sides, as if it were some kind of, even-handed competition between two rivals for Australia's affections, instead of China posing a really unique challenge to the world.
And of course, challenges Australia's economics as well, right? Because we have a very significant economic relationship with China, and presumably that would be under question or at risk in some ways if we actually took a more aggressive stance for the reasons you've articulated. So it shows you the dilemma.
Well, Australia is the Sweden of World War III. Now, I wouldn't suggest that Australia should cut off its iron ore supplies to China as long as China is mainly building, a high-speed rail with them. Of course, it's also building aircraft carriers with Australian iron. But look, we haven't reached the point where Australia should enforce an iron embargo on China. But Australia should be prepared to be called on to do that. Australia should be, taking part in regional security with allies like the United States. I think, and Australia has been doing this. So I don't think Australia, I was a little unnerved by the debates in Australia, let's say a year and a half ago, where there was serious debate about, the narrative of is America Australia's dangerous ally, that kind of narrative that Australia should pursue its own course. And look, if Australia is going to pursue its own course to fight totalitarianism in China, great. But I don't think that's what people meant when they said pursue its own course. Now, this year, I think that's really been ameliorated. I think even with, let's face it, a profoundly unpopular president in the United States, very few Australians would vote for Donald Trump. Australia still has shown the backbone to really confront China over important issues like the coronavirus, like regional security. So, look, 3 cheers for Australia. I'd like to see New Zealand doing more. I'd like to see Singapore doing more, and especially the South China Sea littoral countries. India now has learned its lesson. If we were talking a year and a half ago, Narendra Modi was trying to cozy up to China. He was looking for ways to get Chinese investment. All that's gone. It took a confrontation on the border with China for India to learn that lesson, but it's learned that lesson. Let's see some more from the Southeast Asian countries. I think that's really where we need to see solidarity at this point.
Very interesting. And I think that, the point to take away is we can learn from history. As you say, history rhymes if it doesn't tell precisely the same story. And sometimes it's easy to regret later decisions that weren't taken, that should have been taken earlier to drive a different outcome.
Sure. And, if anyone in Europe is listening, the European Union should also be included here. You started to ask me about companies and what we can do about Chinese corporations being active abroad. Well, the European Union, several European Union countries have really welcomed Alibaba into their e-commerce ecosystems. And, I think that's a bit of a Trojan horse. The European Union also tends to try to make hay whenever the U.S. is having trade problems. I think that needs to stop. The European Union is the world's second largest economy, or third largest, depending how you count things, probably second largest ahead of China. I think the European Union really should be probably doing more. The European Union is very aggressive at trying to regulate American multinationals, especially internet companies like Google and Facebook and their operations in Europe. They haven't shown the same enthusiasm about regulating Chinese companies in Europe. And, I'd really like to see them looking out for China at least as much as they seem to look out for the threat from the United States.
Very interesting. Now, where can people find the article?
Well, at the National Interest, the website in the U.S., they'll find the article probably in your link. If you search the National Interest Salvatore Babones, my work there will come up. It's this article has, like I said, received more than 250,000 views in the U.S. It's been widely circulated as a little summary. Or if they wait a couple months, I'm actually working on an extended version for Quadrant Magazine here in Australia that will take the argument in more detail to about 4,000 words.
Well, we should definitely pick that up again when you've done the next round of work. But I think that was a very important conversation today, and disturbing conversation, Salvatore. Thank you very much for your time. I'll make sure the links are in the comments below, and I look forward to the next one.
Great, and thanks for featuring this on your program.
Good to talk to you. Thanks.